Hello, Felipe. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this and for agreeing to take part in the roundtable on Wednesday. Um, we've known each other for a very long time, and in a way, always in the context of conversations about policy, because that's kind of where we started off, looking at the whole question of mapping together. But could you give people a bit of a potted history in terms of your experience?
Well, thank you, Andrew. Well, my experience has been about 20 years with the creative economy, of which I spent my first 2.5 years in Colombia, carrying on with the mapping of the creative industries financed by the British Council here in Bogota. Also involved with the Ministry of Culture, where I was involved in international negotiations on the free trade agreement with the United States, working on the cultural reserve, but also the first satellite account of culture in the world, which is the Colombian one. We defeated the Finns by about 3 months. Then I moved to the UK. I work with you for the Department of the Creative Economy in the British Council. Together, we manage projects in China, Russia, the Baltic states, the Balkans, Egypt, Lebanon, Tanzania, South Africa, Indonesia, the Philippines, and some of the work in Latin America as well. Then, when I returned to Colombia, I was also working, or I was heading the think tank on copyright for Iberoamerica, ODAI, for almost 2 years. Then I moved to Washington to do my master's degree. And while in Washington, I met with current former president of Colombia, Iván Duque. We worked together for the InterAmerican Development Bank, where we wrote the book The Orange Economy, which so far has more than 600,000 downloads. And from then, when I returned to Colombia, I also headed the think tank on ICTs for the Colombian Chamber on Telecommunications and Informatics. And then the last 4 years, I was also working for the government while President Duque was president. I was his advisor on economics, also the Vice Minister of Creative Industries, and then the Minister of Culture, and finally, Ambassador to Germany. So that's kind of the short resume of 20 years.
Can we go back very, very quickly then to those early days in terms of just thinking about what you were saying there about the work that you were doing in terms of being within the Ministry of Culture and the work on the satellite accounts, but also on the free trade agreement. I think that might be something which is kind of really worth kind of picking on, because I know that you learned a lot from what had happened to the Mexicans in that process. What were the key issues that you were really trying to face when you were addressing that in the context of the creative industries?
Probably, the first counterintuitive thing is you need to face the challenge of public policy, just like if you were dealing with any other sector. I mean, you have to go serious about checking on any kind of previous experiences from other countries. You need to go specific on the economics and the impacts that any kind of measure may have, because very often when you have the cultural debate, it's, oh no, we are so special, we need to be thought differently. Yes and no. Some stuff you need to understand in different light, but you have to be very serious about the technical aspects of public policy. So what you mentioned, we check on the experience of the Mexicans, we check on the experience of the Chileans, the Moroccans, the Israelis, and that served us a lot to understand where they were just going ideological and actually missing opportunities, and where they were being technical and actually trying to copy them. One of the best experiences we found was the negotiation between the Americans and the Australians. It was very technical text, and from that we could gather a lot of information. Also, we had the advantage of the mapping of the creative industries in Bogota. We had also mappings with the Convenio Andrés Bello about the country, about the audiovisual industry, about the music industry. And that information was very useful to us because with the data, with the evidence, was a lot easier to get concessions from the Americans. I think other countries, because they go ideological, it becomes a match of strengths in terms of who can push more on the table. we were able to show the Americans where were our pains and the importance of addressing them. And that in a way allow us also to be very creative in the proposals. So yeah, public policy, it's for the cultural and creative industries, it's special, and it's also not so special. It's actually about method, it's about being rigorous in the technical aspects, taking policy seriously, and not just, this crystal ball and these gut feelings that so often are part of public policies for culture.
I think that's really interesting and really insightful, because I think that there is a real issue that people still tend to think about this as being something which they can kind of dress up in different ways. Whereas in actual fact, many of the arguments you have to make really are about the economics that are here. Because if you're certainly negotiating a trade agreement or looking at policy, that becomes one of the major things that most politicians will be looking at.
Exactly. I mean, you have to bring the argument about employment, about exports, about revenues, about value added. Otherwise, it's just going to be a conversation on what you think is nicest. And then, I mean, you may lose the argument just because, they say, oh, you are just worried about your theater. Well, we have Broadway. Why don't you want to have a Broadway of your own? And you say, no, our theater is different. We need to think in a different scale, and that scale has these different, technicalities in its management, in its dependence on certain government grants, and so on. So when you have these conversations, and it's well-informed conversations, you can move forward in better ways for both parties.
Can I move you on now past the British Council years, because I'm sure we can pick up on that in the day, but I think it's important to also now just talk a little bit about the orange economy, because that has been a really important document, not just in terms of the Americas, in terms of it coming from the IDB, but in actual fact, it's something which has really got traction around the world. Can you just give us a little bit of a sense of kind of what caused you to move into a space to write that, and kind of the style that you took in doing it, and why you took that style?
Well, after my first 10 years of experience, one of the things that were very frustrating was the lack of attention from the serious people in the IDB or the serious people in a Ministry of Finance, even though we had the evidence, the mappings showing a very relevant impact in the GDP, very good dynamics that were observed in the UK or in Mexico, in the US, or even in Colombia. But there was no attention, no proper attention. Remember that about 12, 13 years ago, the world was going on through the responses to the financial crisis. And people were like, oh, we have to protect jobs, we have to reignite the economy, we have to diversify the economy. And people were talking about all sorts of activities and the new technologies, but they were like sidelining creativity and the creative industries. And it was very frustrating. And part of that conversation, precisely with Ivan Duque, was how we can get the message across. And I always remember something that Joe said in a presentation here in Colombia, that politicians will do whatever is convenient for them, regardless of the evidence. So we decided to make a book, an approach with storytelling, to make it relevant for voters. And if voters were going to take it seriously, then politicians were going to take it seriously. And politicians are the bosses of technocrats. So the idea was to get to the entrepreneurs, to get to the people with a very, light in the sense of the structure, in the approach, in the terminology, but very dense and deep in terms of the message with the orange economy. Because we put together the best available knowledge 10 years ago on the creative economy from the British, from the Australians, from the Americans, from the Latin Americans, from the Europeans, from the UNCTAD, from UNESCO, and combine it with what was going on, a financial crisis, a technological revolution, and made it accessible. And it happened that it worked. The book was an instant success. We got like 50,000 downloads like in the first 3 months. Then we got a sustained momentum for years. And yeah, it became a popular term. It became accessible. voters started paying attention to it, politicians started paying attention to it, and the instructions for the technocrats came. And actually, today, the InterAmerican Development Bank, the World Bank, the Andean Bank of Development, the CAF, they all have programs on the creative industries and the creative economy because of this conversation happened.
I mean, I think that's really fascinating, and obviously there are points there that you can raise and discuss in terms of our colleagues in the Philippines, but also with the UK, in terms of kind of what is happening in terms of with ASEAN, because ASEAN's taken a huge interest in this area now. But I'm just going to end this. I'm sure there's something we'll talk about on Wednesday. Just that was a question. I mean, I assume that right now, given that all that is going on in the world, you feel that it's almost time for a reboot of the orange economy, to look at kind of what it means today and in the context of what's going on around the world today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even if certain aspects, I mean, the core definition of what is a creative industry can be adjusted here or there, a little tweak, well, that's not that relevant. But what is relevant is the world has changed a lot. The economy has changed a lot. And also, the change was accelerated by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we need to understand much better today an increased role of digital nomads, the increased role of content as part of the economy. Many non-creative industries have been adopting more and more storytelling as part of their image. They have been adopting more creative and innovative departments. They are trying to also to do their strategies for social responsibility, right? More and more focused to cultural activities, and that I think it's an unexplored area. I mean, the largest part of the research and policy around the creative economy has been focused on the development of the creative industries per se, the value chain of the audiovisual industry, how to have more movies produced, the difficulties and the disease costs in the performing arts, so how to improve our responses to that challenges, and so on. But something that has been always in the background but not pretty well studied is the relationship between the creative industries and the creatives, and the non-creative industries and the non-creative workforce. And I think we need to pay more attention to it. We need to understand better how the changes in the structure of the economy because of the digital technologies are giving also a new role to creatives that is not in the creative industries, but is very important for the economy as a creative force of welfare, of value, of transformations. And so I think we need to in a way move to the next level of understanding the role of the creative economy in the world beyond the GDP, more about its transversal impacts and relevance today.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Felipe. I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating conversation. We'll leave it at that, and I'll look forward to Wednesday. Thank you then.
Thank you very much.
Cheers and take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.